All right, so next we have cognitive and behavioral models. Our key players here, people like for cognitive, Piaget, Vygotsky, information processing or memory models. For behavioral models, Skinner, Bandura, folks like that, Pavlov. Okay, so starting first with the behavioral models. Obviously the focus is on observable behaviors. These are your theories like operant conditioning, classical conditioning, social learning theory, Bandura. The idea is that environmental variables deeply and profoundly affect personality development and psychopathology. So if we want to understand why someone is showing some maladaptive behavior, then we might want to look very closely at how the environment might have reinforced those behaviors, or something like that. Okay? A key point here is that both normal and abnormal behaviors can be learned. So in some classes, you might be talking about operant conditioning, where you're using reinforcement, positive reinforcement, giving your kids stickers or candy for a good report card. You're doing that, you're shaping their behavior, you're positively reinforcing the studying that they did and the good work that they did, and you're reinforcing it because you want to increase the chances that they will repeat that good studying or academic behavior later on. That would be an example of a normal or adaptive behavior that you might be trying to encourage through a behaviorist approach. However, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, environments can lead children to learn abnormal behaviors, right? So if we were taking a modeling or Bandura social learning explanation of this, if you have a very high anxiety parent who is modeling a lot of neuroses and a lot of anxiety, then that child is being exposed to that particular role model, right? And because they are an important role model in their life, then the child is at risk for copying the behaviors that they see in the parental model. Okay, psychopathology, according to this set of theories, these behavioral specifically theories, would say that acquisition or learning of maladaptive or undesirable behaviors could lead to psychopathology, right? So when someone is doing a compulsive ritual or they're acting very aggressive, why might they be doing that? Maybe they were rewarded for being aggressive. Maybe they were punished for not being tough enough. And the other thing it says here is, or lack of reinforcement of adaptive behavior. So it could be either thing. It could be that the wrong maladaptive behaviors are being reinforced and encouraged, or it could be that the adaptive behaviors are just going under the radar and they're not being reinforced enough. Okay, so the child doesn't then learn what the healthy behaviors are. Treatment, sort of some applications that come from this in terms of treatment. Generally speaking, you're getting children who have maladaptive patterns of behavior to unlearn associations or to relearn things or to learn things completely new that that was missing for them in the past. Okay, so if they learned all sorts of toxic, unhealthy behaviors, then you want to give them an opportunity to learn adaptive behaviors. Just a couple words about the cognitive models. So here the focus is on mental processing and development. The view of psychopathology is related to a focus on a combination of cognitive deficits. So your textbook actually was discussing this as well, the idea that we shouldn't be thinking of if there's a learning disability, for example, that it represents a singular cognitive deficit. A learning disability is probably an outcome of multiple cognitive deficits that have all come together to create that particular outcome of a learning disability. Also related to cognitive models here, the treatment the treatment application here would be cognitive therapy or cognitive restructuring. So in some cases with cognitive models, especially with anxiety and depression, feelings of hopelessness, people are not thinking or perceiving their situation in a way that's reasonable or rational. And so you would use cognitive therapy to restructure the way that they perceive events in their life. So if you have someone who's seeing everything glasses half empty, then through some cognitive therapy, you can encourage them to focus on the bright side or the glasses half full. Okay, we'll talk much more about these things in detail later on. This is just the overview. Two more here. So this is our humanistic models now. Rogers, Maslow, so Carl Rogers, that ideal self, real self, you might recall. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of course. Okay, some themes here is that human beings, children included, need to have personally meaningful experiences. It's a goal to develop a strong, integrated sense of self and to feel that you're valuable and you have a lot of skills. In other words, to become self-actualized. The idea is that human beings and children are motivated for growth and self-improvement. Psychopathology, according to this model, happens when there is interference with or suppression of a child's innate tendency to develop an integrated sense of self. Okay? So if you have a child who's being shamed, or you have a child whose basic needs are not being met, or a child who's witnessing domestic violence, for example, or experience other traumas, then they are not able to work towards these higher levels of esteem needs and self-actualization. They're not maybe able to make those good, solid social connections with other people, the love and belongingness needs. So psychopathology can be the outcome, the humanists say, when this natural trajectory of getting to define yourself, becoming the best self you can be, having personal meaning experiences, when that is interrupted by something, a trauma, abuse, bad experience in school, whatever it might be, that distracts you from your innate urge to be the best person you can be. That's when we see psychopathology. Okay? Treatment implications here. Helping children or teens discover their internal resources, help them with self-discovery, so uncovering their talents if they're feeling shame, if they're feeling depressed, hopeless, anxious, helping them to be more engaged members of their life and doing things that they enjoy can be the treatment implication to help alleviate the symptoms of psychopathology. A hot topic right now that comes from this group of theories is something called positive youth development. It's specifically focused on teens. There's a lot of work being done about this at Tufts University in Boston. The idea is to create opportunities for teens to be engaged and take initiative. The idea being that if teens are not engaged and taking part in meaningful experiences in their life, then they're at higher risk for things like delinquent behaviors, drug abuse, addiction, school failure, school dropout, things like that. So it's a big effort to keep adolescents engaged in meaningful activities in their lives. And finally, the family models and the sociocultural models. Okay, so number 5 in our 6 sets of models here of development and psychopathology. Family models. Here's a little family, okay? Family models of psychopathology look beyond the individual child who is showing symptoms of abnormal behavior. And they pay attention to things like family dynamics, family psychopathology. Are you seeing very unhealthy ways that the family is communicating? Is there some sort of stressor or abuse in the home? What are the family values, right? A couple of other points to make here. Remember that the family is the first context that a child is exposed to, right? Later, eventually they go on to school, they might go to college, they go to work, but the first context of development is the family or the home environment. A lot of modeling happening there. We've already talked about that before on the behavioral models board. So what parents and other siblings are modeling in the home in terms of behaviors. If they're modeling abnormal behaviors, then the child is at an increased risk for developing those and imitating those behaviors. That's all. I've kind of already talked about behaviorism. Children rely on their families to meet their needs, right? Think about Erikson, trust versus mistrust. Think about Maslow, having those needs being met. And so families are relied upon to meet social needs, to meet educational needs, food, shelter, financial support, healthcare, that's a little prescription sign there. All of those needs need to be met by a family. So anytime there's a breakdown or the family doesn't meet one of those needs, you have an increased risk factor for psychopathology. Family structure is studied according to these models. So if there's a blended family, if there's been a difficult divorce, if there was an only child versus someone like a Gosling child or a Duggar who has tons of siblings. Changes in familial relationships are focused on. So maybe if someone in the family has been diagnosed with an illness, then maybe the relationship dynamics change, or if someone goes off to college, that changes the relationship. If there's marital stress, that's going to change the relationships and the family dynamics. There's a great figure on page 21 of your text, figure 2.2, that highlights that within the family system, there are a number of subsystems that can be studied and looked upon when trying to understand psychopathology as well. So within the larger family system, you have within that a marital subsystem. So what does the marriage dynamic look like? What's the parent-child dynamic looking like, or what that system's like? How do siblings relate to each other? Another subsystem. How does the family interact with the child's peers? It's another system, right? Do they invite kids over, or is the child more isolated? Does the family support the peers that the teen is hanging out with, or try to restrict contact? The extended family, what are those relationships like? What's the nuclear family's contact with the extended family? Is there a lot of support? Are there grandmothers and aunts and uncles involved, or do they all live very far away, or have they been deceased? Another thing to mention, so I've got my son Dylan and my daughter Hadley, right? They're growing up in the same family, in the same house right now, where their parents have certain jobs, and we've had these jobs for a while now. So the experiences that they have that are the same, we could call shared environment. So I have a Venn diagram here, red for Dylan, blue for Hadley, where they intersect, meaning the parts of their environment that they both experience are shown here in purple, known as shared environment. Some of those things that I just listed, like how we celebrate Christmas and a vacation that we just went on and things like that, all parts of shared environment. But because they are unique individuals, we also talk about non-shared environment between siblings as well, right? So that there are things that uniquely are a part of Dylan's environment in terms of who he plays with in our neighborhood, in terms of what we allow him to do because he's a little bit older, the fact that he's in second grade. And then similarly, because Hadley is a different age and she's a girl and he's a boy, and all of these things end up impacting the type of environment that they get, even though they're both in the same family, of course. So we just make that contrast between shared environment, what siblings experience the same in their family environment, and non-shared environment, which is the unique environments that each sibling experiences. What does treatment look like from a family model or family systems approach? If you have a child who is showing psychopathology, then what you would do is probably a family therapy approach, right? So the therapist and the counselor would involve the entire family and make changes, would look at the marital dynamic, would look at the parenting style, and a variety of other things to help improve the symptoms for the child. It wouldn't just be as simple as that child going to therapy or the child getting a prescription. There would be multiple aspects of the family that would be treated. Okay, and finally the sociocultural models. We're going to do some activities in class about this one, so I'm just going to give a little bit of detail here. Sociocultural models would be like Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model, for example. With these theories, culture is very central. So we have a belief in this model that culture is a very strong influence on child development and therefore on psychopathology. And I also want to just highlight this specific point, which is that certain social or cultural factors disadvantage certain children. And that means that then those children who are disadvantaged by social or cultural factors have an increased vulnerability to developing mental illness. So as just one example, the idea of children living in poverty. If you think back to the last Vodcast, we talked about this, that what are some of the groups of children who are at an increased risk of developing psychopathology? The children who are low SES or living in low-income families. So understanding how poverty is influencing or putting children at greater risk of developing psychopathology would be an area of emphasis in anyone who's taking a sociocultural perspective on psychopathology. Okay, that's all for tonight. See you next time.